post that in the chat function, I can have a look through and I can see, oh, okay, you know, this would be really interesting to ask, and I'll ask her those questions. But I do want to note that today's session is being recorded. So if you have a question for Phoebe, but you feel that, you know, it's a little bit too personal to be recorded, then please go ahead. You can always send me an email and I can forward those questions on to Phoebe. So I'll tell you a little bit about Phoebe. She's a recent Griffith graduate. She graduated in 2019. Is that correct, Phoebe?
Correct.
Yeah. So she did her degree completely online whilst living in Tasmania. Lucky you. I love Tasmania. She was an ACES student and very involved in ACES. So Phoebe, you were posting a lot on Facebook and, you know, being very engaged. So when Phoebe graduated, we asked her if she would be interested in becoming an ACES mentor, and lucky for us, she agreed. So this is a role, an ACES mentor role is a role where we ask former ACES students to take on, you know, a mentor type of role for our current ACES students. So you would have seen Phoebe posting on Facebook and commenting on questions, etc. on Facebook. And we do have another ACES mentor, at least one other ACES mentor with us today, I think, Emily Cooper, who we just saw. So thank you very much for coming. So we're going to talk to Phoebe today. We're going to ask her a few questions about her online learning and what worked and what didn't work. But then we're also going to talk a little bit about Phoebe's current role, her current job. So she works as an assessment report and compliance officer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah. Within community corrections. So we're going to have, I have some questions for Phoebe, and you may have some questions as well about, you know, job searching strategies, or, you know, job interview tips, or what it's like even to work in community corrections. So Phoebe, welcome to this webinar. Why don't you start with telling us a bit about yourself and, you know, why you decided to study criminology of all topics.
Thank you, and thanks very much. Thanks for everyone for coming. I'm super thrilled to be able to chat with you all tonight. So, and please fire away with the questions. No question is a bad question or a silly question at all. So my name is Phoebe, as you all know. I graduated from Griffith in 2019. I suppose it's the age-old question, why would you want to do criminology? Why would you want to work with offenders? It's the age-old question that a million people will ask you when you tell people what you do. And for me, I don't know, I always had a fascination for crime. I was obsessed with crime shows as a kid, which I think a lot of people found a bit bizarre. And my favourite toy was a CSI kit. So for me, my whole childhood was surrounded around crime. But it wasn't until I didn't really know how to channel that and where that would lead me. And when I finished high school and college, I was actually quite anti-uni. I was like, I'm not going to uni. It's not for me. I'm not doing it. And I started a career in private health insurance. And I think after a year of that, I decided that that definitely wasn't for me. I wasn't following my passion. So I was finding myself in a bit of a rut. And after a year of that, I mustered up the courage to try and join the police force, because I thought that was the way to go. And I missed out by 1/1,000,000th of a tenth of a second in one fitness thing. And that was heart-wrenching and devastating. But at the time, I think it was a great learning curve, because I was able to assess all the other options that weren't just join the police force and go down that route that I didn't sort of think of before. And my hairdresser actually was studying this course at the time, part-time. And because of our mutual fascination with crime, we'd sort of had lots of conversations about it, and have you seen this documentary or whatever. And she said to me, you know, you'd love the course that I do. So I think I looked into a bit of it from there. And yeah, I got home from failing my assessment at the police force and applied for uni that day and started the week after. So I've never looked back.
Wow, what a story. And how to, turn something that was, a failure into, I'm going to go and I'm going to do something else. That's wonderful. That same day you went ahead and applied. Wonderful. So I want to ask you a little bit about your studies. So you completed your studies online, completely online. What kept your motivation up? It's so hard sometimes when you're in front of the computer. You know that you should be studying. You know that the course material is right there. But on the other hand, you've got CSI or whatever on Netflix that you really want to watch. What kept your motivation up to continue studying?
And that was the thing. I think for me, I chose Griffith because of it being such a fantastic school of criminology, and I wanted to complete it all online. And motivation was something that I thought, I wonder how I'm going to go with this. It's something very different to a schooling background where someone's tapping you on the shoulder saying, hey, remember there's a due date coming up. I have written down some tips that I do have for motivation, because I think that it is something that a lot of people ask you when you tell them I'm studying online. They go, how do you not do, other stuff in the house, and there's a load of washing or there's something, always random stuff, So my first tip is throughout my whole university degree, I wrote lists like a mad woman and ticked them off. And it seems really silly, but the psychological ticking things off kept my motivation up, that I was actually progressing towards things. And I made this in big term, like schemes, and like daily ones as well. Actually, I still have my weekly planner that I had at uni, and I got it from Kmart for $3.
Ooh.
Now it's just a plain and very blank planner. It's got no months on it, no nothing, and there's lots and lots of pages. And what I did was each month, at the beginning of a trimester, once I'd enrolled in all of my programs and all my courses, I went through and looked at all the due dates in the webpage, and I wrote them on here. I wrote down on the to-do list each month which classes had an assessment due, or if there was something else that was relevant, like a collaborate session or whatever that was popping up in those weeks, I'd pop them in there. And then I'd also write all the due dates on here as well. So it was a really evident reminder right in front of me. And motivation-wise, it was really helpful because I could look at it and I could go, hey, I've got XYZ coming up. I need to keep on top of it. And on top of that, I also had daily lists, and they were the smallest of tasks, but it helped amazingly. I would write lists about things saying literally week 1, week 2, week 3, up to week 12 trimester. And I'd write down lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, lecture 4, collaborate 1, collaborate 2, etc., submit, assignment, blah, 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 you know what I mean. And I would be able to tick those things off, and I think the motivation sort of rolled on from there. My other big tip is to treat uni online like you would on campus. So every day I got up, I got dressed, I ate my breakfast, and I think that was really important because it was like I was leaving the house to go somewhere. And that leads into my third tip, which is have a study space. I think it's all too easy when you're sort of sitting there and you're laying in your bed and writing an assessment and the TV's there or something else is there, or you're on the couch. It's too easy to go, I might just flick on the news. So I think throughout when I was at uni, I had certain study spaces, and they changed throughout the years and the trimesters and whatever it was. Sometimes it was my office, and sometimes it was the dining room table, but it was a certain seat on the dining room table. So it's not necessarily that you need extra space to be able to do it. I think it's just that finding a space that is just your study space was really important for me. And those things made motivation a little bit easier when studying online.
So I love that. You actually created the motivation. You didn't look for it to kind of appear magically from within. You actually created the structure, and from that structure, came the motivation.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And having that space, I think that's something that we as academics talk about a lot as well, is make sure that this is your space where you write. And so you sit down and you know, this is where I work. And you don't try, you don't work in front of the TV, for example. That's a good bad place to be. There's some brilliant tips. I'm definitely going to go to Kmart and have a look at that planner.
Yeah, they get one now. They'll sell out.
Yeah, exactly. We're all going to be rushing there. Of course, keeping our social distance. Yeah. And I also quite like your tip about, actually getting dressed and getting ready. I think for me, having been working with people and giving lectures, now that I'm online, I find myself in pajama pants all day. And I guess the motivation is sort of drains a little bit from you if you're wearing non-motivational clothing. So that's a really good tip. We have Siobhan is saying here, I found a whiteboard calendar with a pin board for like $5 in Kmart, and that's what I use. That's a good one too, a whiteboard on the wall so you can see it. That's a really good tip. Gotta love Kmart. Awesome. Thank you for those tips. Now, in terms of so you talked a bit about managing your time and how you had your schedule and your to-do lists, but did you schedule in time for non-work? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think a lot of my again, it could lead into motivation, but I think it was also being disciplined to getting things done as an online student without having people reminding you. I think it can be quite isolating as an online student because you don't have someone to go, oh, God, I forgot about that assignment, or gosh, I can't remember what's that, and seeing people regularly. I worked off a very I want to say strict timetable. It probably wasn't strict in the means of that it was to the minute, but per week, if I had my week block, I would use say the lectures came out they were recorded on a Monday, so the Tuesday I would watch that lecture, and I'd watch the same ones every week at the same time. So for the 4 classes per week that I had, I'd watch 2 on a Tuesday, maybe 1 on a Wednesday and 1 on a Friday, depending where they fell on my time with my timetable for work as well, but also where they were recorded and released onto the Echo website. So for me, that was about having a timetable to manage my time and treating it like it was my own unique timetable, which was kind of cool because I have someone doing it for me, but I was able to make a timetable at the beginning of a trimester and I stuck to it. So for me, lectures were actually at the same time every week, and I'd watch them at the same time every week, but it was just in a different way that everyone else was doing it on campus. I also think that, managing your time outside of uni is difficult, and I think a lot of it comes down to maybe going, oh, hey, I want to go and hang out with my friends on a Saturday night, but I've got to sacrifice my Sunday to study and fix some things for an assignment or things like that as well. But I always scheduled that in so that if I knew I had something coming up on the weekend, I'd double down on the Friday, or really go, okay, well, Sunday I have to sit at my desk and work away. So I think scheduling and timetabling can be really crucial in order to make sure you're staying on top of things and getting things done.
We have a question here from Billy. She's wondering, did you do 4 subjects per trimester?
I did.
Wow.
Studied full-time university, 4 subjects, and I worked 25 hours per week managing my local boutique as well during that time. So there were times where it did get a little bit hectic, but I think I was able to definitely stay on top of things with all of that that I had in the background, because it almost kept it revolving for me. So I didn't have time to sort of stop and think about when's that going to fit in. It was already me.
So you did you take, and we had a question here about when your brain kicks in. You know, so Lord was saying, well, my brain kicks in at, what was it, 3 a.m. And so did you think about when your brain worked the best and structure your time according to when you knew that you were going to have the most brain capacity?
Absolutely. I'm a night owl and I'm not a morning person at all. I like to sit down and have a great big brekkie and enjoy a big glass of OJ before I start my day. So for me, uni didn't start usually till about 10 o'clock. So I could get up, have a bit of a slow morning, do things that I needed to do admin-wise, send off emails and things like that. Then I used to cook a big breakfast, quite enjoyed that, sit down at my dining table and eat that, and then I'd start uni. And that was almost a good thing for me because it was okay, well, your morning's done and your time's done, now it's time to sit down and do it. And I think that worked best for me. Some people I know, my partner, he did online uni as well. And from his experience, he worked best at night time. So he'd come home from his day job, get home and sit down and do uni. But then weekends, he totally didn't want to touch it. So for me, sometimes sitting down and having a whole Sunday worked. And I understand it works differently for different people. For me, that was how it worked. But I think, it's finding, hey, where's the time where I'm most productive and I'm getting the most done, and being able to schedule that in and how that works for you, individualize it.
Yeah. We have a question here from Billy. Did you complete all the readings, additional readings, etc., or did you refine this to fit 4 subjects in?
I don't think I should say that in front of a lecturer. I think, look, in terms of readings, I definitely did a bit of a cherry picking on what was important and what wasn't. I think that fitting in 4 subjects is a massive load, and sometimes we can think that we're not doing enough. I'm a perfectionist. So for me, it was like, oh, I haven't done all of it. I need to get it all done right now. That's not how life works. It's not the real world. And in the real world, you have a little bit more time than just 12 weeks to learn things. So, going back and reading them at a later date can sometimes be easier. The other thing I found was that if I was doing an assignment on a certain subject, I would heavily read on that. So I would focus my energy on that reading and going through it with a fine, tooth comb, making sure I got everything out of that reading that I needed to. But then if there was a reading on something that I really didn't connect with in terms of the content of the class, or that I wasn't writing an assignment on, I would just revise it at exam time and make sure I've covered it then. But a lot of the time I found that the lectures were very comprehensive and covered it a lot of the time anyway. It might just be additional information that you thought was important, which is awesome for assignments.
Yeah. So in terms of understanding which reading is important and what to read, you really made sure that you focused when you had an assessment that was on a particular topic, that you really honed in on that particular reading or those sets of readings. Yeah. And then for an exam, did you do more of kind of skim reading? So reading everything, but kind of reading.
Probably more. I would at exam time, I'd find that I wrote notes very thoroughly at uni. So everything that came up in lecture, I wrote a note about. So when exam time came, it was all there for me. I didn't have to collate anything. And I kept it on a big Word document. So for each class at the beginning of the trimester, I just write notes and then have week 1, week 2, week 3, blah, blah, blah. And everything underneath that subheading's already done when I was watching the lecture, so that when it came to exam time, for me, it was about reading over my notes and making sure that I understood all the content that was there. And if I didn't, I'd talk to my lecturer or my tutor about it. And then being able to go to the readings and summarising them, looking at what was the part of the reading that we were meant to learn from it. You're not going to get a question on what was the number of people in this study. More about what did the study say, what was the outcome of it, and what was it talking about, summarising that, popping it into my notes, and I was good to go. And that was if I didn't get to cover it on an assessment.
What a good idea, because sometimes when you sit and you listen to, sometimes lectures can be, you know, an hour and a half or 2 hours. And if you just sit and you're just receiving, you tend to, you know, think of other things. And but if you're sitting and you're actively taking notes, you're not just creating your study notes, you're also actually understanding the material in a much better way. So that's really, really good advice. Now, you actually mentioned something about lecturers, and you said, you know, if you had any questions about anything that you've written down, that you contacted lecturers. And I was just wondering, when it comes to, so when I give a lecture, I see my students, and if I have tutorials, I really get to know them, and I get to put a face to a name. But when you are an online student, I guess sometimes you can feel a little bit invisible. So how did you establish a sort of relationship with your lecturers and you know, get them to know you?
Yeah. And I think that that's such a hard part about online learning is you're not sitting in front of someone and going, oh, look at me, hand up, and asking questions. Especially if you're a really curious person and you're really engaged with what you're doing, it can be frustrating at times. For me, I had some things that I stuck by every trimester and did the same with every lecturer, and it created a really easy working relationship and a lot of success in terms of being able to be open, honest, and have great communication with my lecturers. What I did was at the beginning of every trimester, I sent an email off to each lecturer and I introduced myself. And it seems like such a funny, silly little thing, but I said quite literally, hi, my name's Phebe. I'm from Hobart, Tasmania. I'm in your class XYZ. And then I'd say, I have enrolled in this class for this reason, and I'm hoping to get this out of it. Or I'm hoping that this will help me in the future with this. So being able to give them an idea of me and why I was there, I think that made a connection a lot easier down the track when things, you know, by week 4 and 5, when it's getting to that time where assessments are due and things like that, I wasn't saying, oh, by the way, I'm just someone that you don't see, but I'm here and can you help me with this? I already had that connection.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time I already had their phone number. They'd said, if you need to call me, give me a call. And that's what I did a lot of the time, you know. Don't be afraid to send a million emails. I know that you can think sometimes, oh, you know, should I send that? Shouldn't I? Just do it. And I think that at the end of the day, the lecturers, I've never had a bad experience with throughout my whole degree. They're very responsive and they're there to help. That's their job. So I think that, you know, every time I asked a question, it was answered. Or if I asked or, you know, wanted some help, they were there. And just being totally honest.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea as well, in sending an email and introducing yourself, and actually you know, making your introduction something positive. You know, I'm taking this course for this reason, and this is what I'm hoping to get out of it, and I'm really looking forward to it. As a lecturer, I would love that type of email, and it's a very quick reply. You know, thank you, I hope you will enjoy it. And you are absolutely right in that when you come across a student who perhaps, you know, in week 7 or 8 is struggling and they email you, then you wish that there had been you know, a discussion earlier on, or that you at least knew the person. So that's a really, really good tip that I can endorse as a lecturer.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Too, that it would be just as hard on the other side. That, you know, quite often too, when I was listening to lectures, they would say things like, oh, you know, to all the online students out there, you know, hopefully they're listening. And we're sort of an anonymous part of the student community that they don't see either. So being able to sort of establish that connection just makes it easier for everyone.
That's right. That's right. We had a question here about theory. Any advice on theory units? Theory and statistics, they can be the trickiest ones.
Yeah.
Any advice on how to go about succeeding in a theory unit?
Theory units are hard, and I think that, to be honest, that they are really crucial and do matter. And once you've got it, it carries through to so many other classes. And what I did was when I, in my first couple of years, well, my first year and a half maybe, when theory was really heavy, things like psychology of crime, sociology of crime, those sort of subjects, I made Word documents with the theory and everything that I learned on it, and all the sources that I found, all the readings that I found, things like that I could just keep in a format that was easy to find again in the future and that suited me. So if I found something that clicked at the beginning, I had it there sitting there, that it was a way that I understood it. The other great thing, which Emily, I've just seen, has put there, YouTube. YouTube is gold when you're trying to find information on theories and you've read the textbook 80 times and you still think, how has anyone translated this? Because I still can't. So you sit there and you go, I've got to step back for a second, and you get on YouTube and look it up. And 9 times out of 10, there's someone with a video. And then next week you'll get to class and it will be in the lecture anyway. So I think that it's a great tip. Get on, do further research, go outside of what you're seeing just in lecture if it's not clicking with you. And again, reach out to your lecturer and say, hey, this isn't clicking with me. Is there anything else that I can do or read that would make sense? Or is there something practical? Because at the end of the day, we all don't learn the same way. So it makes sense that, one way of explaining it for one person isn't going to make sense to another. But definitely write it down. If something clicks with you at the beginning or later down the track, write it down and it'll carry through to many other units that you do.
That's a very, very good tip. I love theory, so I don't understand what the students are talking about, but I understand that many students do find it difficult. So I have a question about your social life, and what I mean by that is getting to know other students, because when you're when you're an online student, sometimes you can feel a bit sort of isolated and alone. How did you counteract that? How did you sort of get to know fellow students and feel that you were part of a community?
Absolutely, and I think it is really hard. It's very isolating being an online student, not being able to meet people the way that you think that you should at uni, or that you see on all the movies. For me, I'm a very social person. My mouth never stops moving. I am a talker from way back. So it was very hard to take a step back at online uni and not being able to have, the group of friends to talk to. I think that for me, it was about staying in the loop through Facebook was huge for me. The ACEs group, I found essential to be able to stay in touch with people and to be able to talk to people about things that were concerning me or things that I was really enjoying as well. And I usually at the beginning of exam period, I'd write a little message to everyone just to say, there are other online students out there that don't have anyone there, or other stuff that you just don't really, they're not huge, but they do keep you in touch. Also, the Facebook pages, I think there's a Criminology Society page. I can't remember the exact name of it, and there's just a Griffith School of Criminology page. I liked both of those, and that kept me up to date a lot of the time with things that were going on campus that I didn't know about. And being able to read the comments and engage a bit in the comments was always good, and I found that helpful. And it sounds lame, but the discussion board is actually it's actually helpful. And I found that sometimes it was, just answering someone else's question, and then, they might email me and say, hey, I didn't realise there was another online student. What did you think about this? Or so sometimes that was really good tool to be able to use. Emily said when people use it, exactly. I think that though it is good, because when people do use it, you're meeting like-minded people who sort of want the same thing out of an assignment or whatever that you do and that you want to talk to them about. So yeah.
And as a lecturer, I love that. It puts such a smile on my face when I see another student who has responded to another student's query on the discussion board, and it feels, they're mentoring each other, and I love it. So that's a really good tip. And Emily was saying, I wish more people use discussion boards. But I guess you're right. The people who do use them are like-minded in that they love that communication with others and being able to pose questions and get their answers. And yeah, awesome. We had a question, actually it was a bit further up, but we had a question about sort of coming back to your structure and how structured you were with your time. Once you hit kind of week 6 or 7 and that first assessment is due, everything just falls to pieces. You were supposed to listen to your lecture, you were supposed to do this, but all of a sudden all you're doing is writing your assessment. How do you keep to your structure, and how do you continue to listen to lectures, etc., even though you're in the middle of writing assessments?
It's hard to focus and find out where to focus your time. I always started assessments very early. So if something was due in, say, week 7, for me it was underway in week 3. And I was already looking at materials or coming up with ideas of what I wanted to do. And that's probably me just being, in that mindset of and I've got to have this done. But also I think that it helped when I got down the track, because I did have extra time to fiddle around with things and go back a few times and have a look at it. So that really helped. But also I think that you can, when you're starting and you're getting to, say, maybe week 6 and 7 and things are starting to fall apart, and you're going, oh, there's too much on. There's too much on. I've got 3 assessments due this week and 2 collaborate sessions and my lectures, and I can't do it all. What I did was I went back to my timetable and I just reassessed it and looked at it and prioritised things and tasks where they needed to go. But my biggest tip for this is don't let one week leak into the next, because that'll just overflow and become the mess. So if your lecture for that week hasn't been watched, watch it that week. Watch it the Sunday night or watch it on the Sunday morning. Get it done. Don't let it lag into the next week, because that's when you create the overflow of, oh, I've got 2 of those now. And then you watch the first one, you go, oh, God, I can't watch 2 of the next. I can't do 2 of them now in a row. So that's my biggest tip, is to not let it go into the next one. So start early, make sure you're on top of things. In terms of assessments, if something was due on Monday next week, I'd have it due in my head the Monday before. So be done, ready. Maybe, I don't know, you have to fix up a few references or go through and proofread a couple of times, but it was ready to go, so that if something did happen and the crisis erupts and you go, there's so many things that I need to do, you're not feeling pressured in that moment, especially when you've got multiple assignments due in certain weeks.
That's a really good idea, to set your own due dates, your own timelines. I think that's a brilliant idea. I want to shift focus just a little bit and start talking about your current role. So we can come back to, Phoebe and her success in terms of online studies. But I'll ask you a little bit about your role at the moment. Tell us about your work and what it is that you do, and what a regular day at the office looks like for you.
Absolutely. So as Lee said before, the mouthful is Assessment Report and Compliance Officer. I work at Community Corrections in Hobart, in Tassie, and I work in a suburb in Hobart that's just maybe 15 minutes out of the city. My role there is fantastic. I'm absolutely thrilled and enjoying it, especially as a graduate, just finished uni. I was beyond excited to have the opportunity to start my career at Community Corrections, and it was somewhere where I saw myself. I think when I got to year 1 at uni, my first year, and it felt like the big wide world of criminology, and there were so many options, and then I started to narrow down my focus and see where I had a passion. And when you got to those second year subjects and the electives were rolling in, I found out that, corrections was kind of more my niche. And so I followed that and refined it and refined it as the years went on. And then when I got to the end of uni, I had so much built up knowledge for corrections that it was great because it was so valuable when I was applying for jobs. So my current role and what I currently do, in a nutshell, is I interview offenders who are coming through the community corrections system. They've been found guilty in court, but they haven't been sentenced, and I'll write pre-sentence reports for them for the court, and that will include recommendations for their sentencing, basically. So I look at them in a holistic view about everything, that they've gone through in the past and what they're going through now and what they're hoping to achieve in the future, and then summarising that into a document and then giving that to the magistrate. So that's my job. I also do compliance with conditions for people who are on community corrections orders, which is the order that we have in Tasmania. So that looks at maybe complying with different conditions that the magistrate set. And the assessment part of my job is the interviews and the assessing offenders. So a regular day in the office might look like for me 2 hours of interviewing an offender or a client. And then I might get back to my desk and do a bit of writing, and then I might make some phone calls to different people, or I might contact people by email, and then repeat. So that's sort of what my job looks like a lot of the time. But yes, I'm absolutely enjoying it, and it's something that I would highly recommend for anyone who was graduating from criminology.
Fantastic. So I currently teach a course called Intro to Corrections. So obviously that would be of interest to anybody who was interested in corrections. But what did you do in terms of targeting electives? I think Renee had a question here. Which electives do you feel really help prep you for this role in community corrections?
Absolutely. Okay, well, I finished last year, so some of them may have changed in terms of their titles and things like that. But the units that I did was understanding corrections, and that was fantastic. So that looked at both custodial and community corrections, and that's when I decided that I wanted to look at the community corrections side of things, because I was open to both of those in that subject. I think that was fantastic. There was also a subject, punishment, justice and reform, I want to say. That was good about understanding sort of the principles of sentencing and things like that. And it sounds really silly, but it is all these theories that come into, they're so valuable when you get into your job because you've got it in your head and you already know this stuff. I think that once you've got it, you can apply it in so many different situations, but those subjects I think really helped a lot. I also did some other subjects that weren't necessarily just correction subjects, but sparked my interest and thought, well, if I was dealing with multiple different offending types, I want to be able to have a broad range to deal with that. So I did things like white collar crime and other subjects that I thought, well, if I come across an offender like that, I'm going to have some knowledge of it. So, it wasn't necessarily always just doing something with corrections in the heading, but looking about how that could apply into my future role and where I wanted to go as well, and not just going, oh, that one looks all right. Just looking into it a little bit deeper really helped out in the long run.
Fantastic. We had a question here about, was there anything that you did sort of in terms of extracurricular activities or any volunteering that you did that kind of set you up for being able to gain this employment upon graduation?
Absolutely. I actually didn't have the opportunity to volunteer in Tasmania. I approached many different organisations, and it's really hard in Tassie because we're such a small little state. To get into any of those positions, they often want experience, and this is the age-old thing that I think a lot of people have raised since I've been a mentor in the ACEs group, and I myself had lots of struggles with, is that they say, we want experience for you to have a position or to have a role, but to have the role you need experience, and you need experience to want it. It's this big loop of, well, where do I start? And the volunteering was something I looked into a lot. But that was probably one of the downfalls that I had with online studying, is that I didn't have the opportunities to do the internships that you can do on campus. and there was no opportunity to do that from an online perspective at all. And also with volunteering, when I contacted places like community corrections or some other different organisations that deal with offenders like Salvation Army and things like that, a lot of their programs are already set through the university here with the social work side of things, rather than it being, being able to outsource through different unis. So that was really hard, and I really struggled with that, especially having in the back of my mind to try and set myself up for graduation. But I think I just trusted in the process that uni was a great stepping stone, and once I finished that, I could really excel by going into a volunteering position before I got full-time paid work. But it just so happened that I landed in the role that I did only about a month or two after graduation.
So you obviously, succeeded anyway without that experience of volunteering. And so sometimes students are told, you can use your university experience to reply to selection criteria. Did you do that? Did you use any of your university experience, or I've taken this particular course which is good, or I've done this group work, or did you use any university experience to reply to selection criteria?
I used a lot of that in my selection criteria. I think I used a lot of examples saying I've the question or the point might have been an understanding of the justice system and offending and why people offend. I was able to say I've undertaken classes such as understanding corrections where I learnt this, or I was able to grasp the concept of this. In my job, I use a lot of motivational interviewing a lot of the time, and that was a massive concept that I learnt in rehabilitating offenders. It's another class I'll recommend if you are looking at corrections. They'll come to me as I talk. But I think that with motivational interviewing, it is big, Emily, and it was great to be able to put that I practiced it at uni. I used that experience in my selection criteria. There are a number of other things that I was able to do, but even doing things like using tools, assessment tools and things like that in a theoretical sense, I was able to use that in my selection criteria and say I understand the theoretical basis of these concepts, of these theories, of these tools. So I have the knowledge base there ready to go. And I think that if you're an eager and enthusiastic person and you've got an ability to adapt and learn, that's not the worry that you're going to pick up the practical side of it. It's that you've got it all up there and you're ready to go in terms of that as well. So I think you've already got a head start where you're at being at uni and being able to apply that to your future positions.
So Megan was just asking here, when you started your role in corrections, did you receive training, or you expected to know what to do from day one?
No, of course you're not expected to do everything from day one. It can be quite confronting, because if you've never worked in that industry before, I think the first week I certainly felt very tired and thinking, this is very overwhelming, but it's a slow process and they don't just push you out in there and go, okay, off you go. I received a lot of training in my organisation that I'm in that was really set me up ready to go, and it was based on all the practical stuff. So all the theoretical stuff I had sitting there in my head, and it was just a matter of being able to say, well, I don't know how to do this. With it, talking to a person, how do I talk about this, or how do I, bring that up, and motivational interviewing, knowing the concepts of it, but how do I apply it into a conversation? And those were the things that I learnt when I joined the department that I'm in through training.
So in terms of references, if you didn't have that kind of volunteering experience, etc., who did you use as your references? Did you use any lecturers, for example?
I used lecturers. Because of the relationship that I'd built with my lecturers, I was able to get quite a few references, which was fantastic. So I had some lecturers that I had written down in my resume, but I also had written references and recommendations from lecturers who over the years had said to me that if I wanted a recommendation, they were more than happy to do it when I asked. So I collated them and put them on my resume at the bottom and submitted them with my application.
Fantastic, and that looks good as well. And it brings us back a little bit to you actually introducing yourself to your lecturers. You know, the first thing you do with an email, because you get more of a relationship then, rather than, you know, towards the end of a course to say, oh, hey, you don't know me really, but can I have a reference?
Yeah.
So, yeah. In terms of landing that job that you're in right now, you obviously had to go through a job interview, right? And that can be so incredibly nerve-wracking. Were you nervous during the job interview? Were there any sort of really tricky questions that you received, and how did you answer that, and how did you keep your calm?
Yeah, the job interviews are horrible, and I think anyone who says otherwise must be superhuman, because they are absolutely, they're never a nice thing to do. They're always nerve-wracking, and everyone feels the same no matter how much experience you have. I had lots of experience in retail before completing my criminology degree, and if I went for a retail interview, it would have been exactly the same. But I think it's good, because it means you're serious about it, and it means that you care and that you want to do it. So it's good to be nervous, and it's good to have a little bit of that, you know, energy. For me, when I was doing my interview, I actually, so I'm from Tassie, and for my graduation, I flew up to Queensland in December. And I got a call about a week before, and they said, oh, we want to get you in to do an interview. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. What date? And they said, oh, it's this date. And I went, oh, I'm in Queensland that day for my graduation. And it was this awful feeling of, oh, well, it's the job I want, but it's my graduation. But they were great. They were accommodating, and they said to me, we can do it via telephone. So now we've got so many mediums that we're learning as well with this, that we've got, you know, Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and we've got telephone and everything. So that was actually great. I was able to do that. And the worst part was, though, that my interview was at 9 o'clock in the morning the day after graduation. So I left the graduation ceremony, went home and crammed all my answers in for my interview that I thought were going to come up. And the next morning I was straight on there, and I forgot that Tassie time and Queensland time were different. So Queensland time, I was up, you know, from like 5 o'clock in the morning having to prepare for it, because it was actually at like 8 o'clock or something like that. So, yeah, that was a bit nerve-wracking, to be honest with you. I felt a bit rushed, and everything was a little bit crazy in the lead up to it, because I was, you know, I was excited about graduation, and then I had to focus on an interview the next day. I think dealing with the nerves is being confident in yourself that you've come this far, and that you've got the skills, you've done it, you know, you've put in the hard yard. So you've got to focus on the fact that, you know, you've got yourself to where you need to be and prepped for the interview. What I do before a job interview always is write a million questions and everything in the world that they could possibly ask me. And I get a friend or a family member to read that out to me, and maybe say a few things of how I'm responding or whatever that may be. And I always find that helps. Challenging questions. There's always some challenging questions. I think the usual ones that are always the most challenging, and they're in every job interview, is what's your strengths and what's your weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find those within yourself. But I actually asked my employer, I asked my lecturers, and I asked my friends and family, what would you say that my strengths and weaknesses are? So that they weren't just coming from what I thought, but they were coming from what everyone else kind of thought as well. Which was great, because it made me look at things a little bit differently in the way that I could approach those questions. And also maybe questions like what you believe is challenging in the role that you're going for. Or one of the most simple questions that I've been asked is, why do you want to work with offenders? And coming up with an answer for that on the spot can be really hard, because it's not necessarily something that you think about. You just, you know, you've done your degree, and yeah, of course you want to, because you know, this is your field, but you know, having an answer for that can be really hard. So I think that everything of all those questions, really important to have a bit of a grasp on. And then obviously just looking at the fine details of your job and the job description and understanding all of that as well. But I think that those questions are really essential to know some answers to.
I hadn't actually thought of that. Why do you want to work with offenders? Of course, that's incredibly important. And they want to make sure that they have somebody sensible, somebody who doesn't just say, you know, because it looks fun and CSI or something. You know? So, yeah, so I guess it's really good to think about that answer. Emily here agrees with you. It's a common question. So, okay, in terms of any other questions? We're kind of sort of coming towards the end here, and I want to see if anybody has any last minute questions before we end up. Celia has just posted something here about careers and development and how you can do psychometric testing. And I like your idea about, you know, what are my strengths and weaknesses? Well, you are you, and you're incredibly subjective about everything that you say about yourself, right? So it's a good idea to get somebody else to come up with words that describe you. Billy had a question about ePortfolios. Have you had to use ePortfolios in applying for jobs?
I've never had to use an ePortfolio. All of my jobs have been submitted electronically, but it usually has been about the selection criteria, a resume and a cover letter, and that's it. I've never had to do an ePortfolio. I remember applying for jobs years ago where you have to do lots of funny things online, but I think every organisation is different, and you never know what the process is going to be until you're doing it. But just have a good bank up of things, have your resume sorted. I did the developing professionally class in my final year, and amazingly, I basically had to do nothing when I applied for my jobs because it was all done for me. So my resume was written, my selection criteria was written for my job, because one of the jobs that I chose in that class to write the selection criteria from was the job that I went for.
What a good, that's fantastic.
And and it had other people had looked at it, so I knew that it was already sound and ready to go. The other things, like a cover letter we had to do as well, so that was all sorted. So it was great. I had everything sitting there ready to go, and all I had to do was press submit, and it made my life a whole lot easier.
One final question here from Stacey. So you're all ACES students, obviously you're all high achievers and you want to get the top mark, and it can be quite nerve-wracking and you can feel quite anxious about making sure that you get that top mark. So Stacey's asking, did you ever feel anxious, or is it as if you wouldn't make it through certain subjects with the marks that you wanted? The sort of perfectionist approach, you're wanting it to be perfect and get that top mark. How did you deal with the anxiety and pressure that comes with that?
It is so hard, and look, the pressure we put on ourselves is greater than pressure that anyone else will put on us ever throughout our entire lives. I think that I was certainly like that all through uni, and something that I had to learn to control, because I was going, well, if I don't get over that, I must suck. And it's not the case. And a lot of the time, yet again, it was going back and talking to my lecturers and saying, hey, I got this mark, I'm feeling like I'm not happy with it. And this is why. And they may say, look, the average was XYZ. In the scheme of things, you did amazing. No one got over 2 marks over what you got, or something like that, And it's not always about the mark at the end of the day. And I think that took me a long time to realise. And it was probably third year where I sort of realised that it wasn't, it wasn't always out of 100, because maybe the top mark was only 80. Or something like that. It was, it wasn't always the case. So concentrating less on the marks and concentrating more on what you're getting out of it, and making sure you're getting the right things out of it, the content, you're learning something. But I can understand and appreciate that it is hard. It's better said than done. But I think, talking to your lecturers and seeing where you sit. For me, one thing that was always really important before exam time was I always tried to pass the subject before going into exams, and that was the thing in my head that I always had, because I like to lessen the pressure for exam time. So I like to do well in the first assessment and second assessment, make sure, you know, really good marks. And if that went a bit haywire, sometimes the pressure was not good, because you go, well, I haven't got it all set up. But it's being able to, again, be confident in yourself and know that you put in your effort and you get it out. So I think that, yeah, it's one of those things you learn over time as well.
That's a very good point for us to end on. Thank you so much, Phoebe. This has been absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure you would all agree that we've really gotten something out of this this Q&A. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Phoebe, for being here. Thank you, Celia, who's hosted all of this and done all of the admin stuff on the sideline. So thank you very much, everyone. If you have any further questions for Phoebe, I'm sure she'll be happy to.
Absolutely. Please message me anytime on the Acing, Phoebe Jeffrey on Facebook, just for work reasons. But you can message me on Facebook at any time, or my email is phoebe.taplin@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Be safe, and enjoy the rest of your night.
See you guys.
Thank you.